at least the past decade, electrification has made for strange bedfellows because not every car company chose to compete in every segment with an electric entry. But that's really starting to change, and one of the vehicles that started that change logically is the Audi e-tron, the original one back around 2019. This has, of course, since been relabeled the Audi Q8 e-tron to represent the general size of this. And that's the important thing about the Q8 e-tron. This is not a Tesla Model Y competitor because it's actually notably bigger. So if you're looking for more room inside your next luxury EV, more of a comfortable ride than you find in some of those really overtly handling focused EVs, you might want to check out something like this. Or, of course, the new Polestar 3, or the Acura ZDX, or the Cadillac Lyriq, because those are among the EVs that are in this exact same size segment, more or less. Basically, that mid-size two-row luxury EV segment, not the compact segment where the Model Y plays. Let's talk about the exterior design first. This video is going to be a little bit shorter than normal because, of course, we already have content on the Q8, but I have been able to drive it back-to-back with the Acura, the Honda, and of course recently with the Lyriq and the other options in this segment. So we now have a bit more information about exactly how this stacks up. I like the Audi design language, so if you're a fan of the Audi look as well, you might want to choose this over some of those more outlandishly shaped EVs or the jelly bean shaped EVs that we find at Mercedes. Now, the Mercedes EVs, as a result of their jelly bean-like profile, are more efficient than the Audi Q8 e-tron, and that is one reason you might want to choose some of those vehicles over the others. The Q8 e-tron rides on a modified version of the same platform that Audi uses in a variety of their gasoline vehicles. So there are certain compromises, but this is not exactly a direct just EV conversion because they made some significant structural changes to support the big battery pack underneath the vehicle that gives you nearly 300 miles of range. As we move around to the side, you'll notice the charge door there is a powered charge door, and I really love the attention to detail here. The hinges actually go flat, so just check that out as it motors in. You'll really see that they paid a lot of attention to the way this powered charge door actually functions with that part rolling in. It's kind of a cool touch, but we don't get a second charge door on the other side in this model. Moving around to the back, you'll notice that we have a really upright hatch in the rear and a pretty boxy profile. That combined with a length that's over 190 inches is one of the reasons you want to choose this over those smaller EVs out there. The other reason to choose the Q8 e-tron over some of the competition is the width of the vehicle. So not only is this longer, a little bit taller than average, it's also wider than average. And that really gives this the distinctive presence we see here. Now, if you want the ultimate Q8 e-tron, you want the SQ8 e-tron because it adds an extra motor to the back. Yes, it's a tri-motor model. You will notice the extra size and extra width definitely back here in the cargo area. We get a significantly deeper cargo area and a wider cargo area than average. I'll just whip out my trusty tape measure here and we'll see. It's actually hard to get all the way to the back of that cargo area. It's 43 inches to the sill. You could actually stick a little bit more in there if you want it to hang out. And it's a pretty wide cargo area as well. This cargo area is 44 inches wide, so pretty square, 44 by 44. That's a really big cargo area in the back. It's important when you're looking at cargo volume measurements to remember that Audi, like most European companies, does not measure the space above the rear seat back. So this entire portion of the cargo area is not included in the official cargo room specifications. We have a lot of stuff going on here because we're out here in Washington taking a look at these vehicles today, so I'll move that aside. Under the floor, we have the other reason to buy the Q8 e-tron. We actually have a spare tire. Now, this is one of those inflatable style spare tires, collapsible, whatever you want to call it. If you want to know more about how that works and what they look like when they're filled with air, be sure and check out our video on that. I'll put a link down there in the description. That's also why we find a cargo area that seems a little bit smaller than average, because Audi actually gives us a spare tire. There's also that additional cargo area behind there, around there, but they could probably have given us an extra 8 to 10 cubic feet if they deleted the spare, as in every other manufacturer's EV. Of course, if you wanted to reclaim that space, you could just remove the spare tire and then you'd have one of the largest cargo areas in this segment. But it's not just about the cargo area for this vehicle, it's also about the back seat. I'll just hop in here and show you what I'm talking about. We get a lot of space in the back. In our classic child seat measurement technique here, we'll measure up from the seat back and then across. Here we get 29 inches of rear seat room, and that means that you could easily put some of those larger rear-facing child seats behind a 6-foot tall driver. This seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. Be very easy to do that, and that is not something that's easy to do in most of the compact EVs. So if you're looking at, say, an XC40 EV or even an XC60 plug-in hybrid, you're not going to get as much room in the back, and that's one of the reasons to upgrade into this next category. It's worth noting that the Tesla corollary really is the Tesla Model X. It's the bigger, sort of egg-shaped vehicle, but it starts as a 2-row with similar dimensions. Now, more about those dimensions. This front seat's more further back in its tracks. Still have several inches of headroom here, maybe about 2 inches of headroom there. And, pardon me, the rear seats have an armrest that pops down. And then we have a 60/40 folding rear seat design. Sorry. With a 20% section that folds out of the 60% side over here. So this passenger side folds as one piece, or you can fold down that right there. That's a really handy cargo practical touch. Again, we don't find in many EVs, and you don't find that, for instance, in the Acura ZDX or the Cadillac Lyriq. If we pop the hood, we don't find a cargo area as large as we find in some EVs, but importantly, we still have one here, and you don't find a cargo area at all in the ZDX or the Lyriq. And that has always struck me a little peculiar because the hood is not any shorter in the Cadillac or in the Acura. Actually, I think in the Acura, it's a little bit longer than this hood right here. It's a pretty long hood, of course, because again, the relationship to the gasoline vehicles in the Audi lineup, but that gives us that storage area for your charge cables, your charge adapters, etc. And you are going to need charge adapters for a while. Even though we're transitioning to the new J3400 or NACS connector in North America, it's going to be a while until we actually get that connector in high volume, especially in new vehicles. This still uses the CCS connector, but more importantly, charging stations out there. By the end of calendar year 2024, it does appear that the CCS charge network is growing faster than NACS, oddly enough, in North America, and may actually outnumber NACS by 2025, late 2025, unless we see a different trajectory starting soon. Now, powering the Q8 e-tron is a 114 kilowatt hour battery pack, and that powers a dual motor setup standard, producing just over 400 horsepower. This is not the most powerful entry in the segment, but if you want more oomph, you can get that SQ8 I mentioned earlier that adds an extra motor in the back for torque vectoring capability, something that Audi has long been known for in the regular gasoline luxury segment, but they're now bringing to the electric segment as well. The rumor mills have implied that maybe the Q8 e-tron is going to sail off into the sunset for a different model coming in the future, but we know that there are certainly going to be more electric vehicles coming soon, and if you want to know Audi's latest electric vehicle and how it drives, be sure and stay tuned because I will be driving that late December. So be sure and stay tuned for that one. Now let's get to the interior. Logically, the front seats are very similar to the rest of the Audi lineup in North America. Multi-way power driver seat over here with available massage functionality. I like the seating position in here because unlike some EVs where we have a really low slung, relaxed seating position, you can actually still have these seats pretty upright, even being a taller driver. If I adjust this so I have about an inch of headroom left, you can see I'm actually sitting in a fairly upright position. I find that personally a bit more comfortable, but of course if you'd like to be more relaxed driving, you can do that too. We then have a powered tilt telescopic steering column and of course memory linked seats. The interior in this model is fairly dark, so I apologize for that in advance if any of the colors show up a little bit strangely here, but the dashboard design and the door design and seat design, again, very in keeping with the rest of the Audi lineup. We have a decent amount of shiny black plastic, so right there around that e-tron logo, but we also have open pore wood trim running across the dashboard. I do like the addition of traditional elements in a luxury vehicle like the wood trim that we don't find in all of the electric options out there. We find the same Audi infotainment system that we find in other vehicles right here in the center console. This supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. We then have that second screen down here for the climate control and certain other vehicle functions. Then we have one of Audi's unusual joystick style shifters where this is the shifter toggle right there. Park is the button on the side and that's the display for that. Audi changes their shifter around from vehicle to vehicle, so I think I prefer the shifter that we find, for instance, in the RS6 a little bit more than we find in this model. We have kind of a floating center console, so you can see that under that that bar, you can actually stick your hands right through there, and that means that they've positioned the cup holders actually really quite low in the dashboard. I think that's a little bit unusual. I wish they were a little bit higher up, but it does mean that those larger takeout drinks are not really going to interfere with the operation of that shifter. Then of course on the driver's side we find features like the full color head-up display there, we find the full color LCD instrument cluster here with of course the Google satellite imagery depending on your subscription status in the vehicle. If you're wondering what it looks like when you don't have a subscription to the Google satellite imagery, that's what that looks like right there. So definitely a lot more basic than if you paid the extra for that continuing subscription. The steering wheel, it's a pretty familiar Audi 4-spoke design with the split side spokes right there. Controls for the infotainment system on that side of the steering wheel, controls for the instrument cluster over there on that side, and then the cruise controls, those are on a stalk at the back. So Nick, the one thing that I have always appreciated about the Q8 e-tron, and I'll apologize if I just call it the e-tron even though that's now a sub-brand, but that's what this model was called at the beginning, is that this is just sort of normal Audi that happens to be electric, whether we're talking about the design or honestly a lot of the driving dynamics.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't feel anything different than a standard Q8 or even a Q7 at that point. It doesn't feel too far out of reach from those internal combustion variants. So this is my first time in a e-tron bar. I mean, I haven't been in any e-tron, so this is my first time in one. And I'm surprised how it rides. I come from kind of an Audi family. My brother has a Q7, or Q8, excuse me. My dad has an Audi. All of the functions are relatively similar. There's nothing really changed in terms of how the infotainment, the climate control, the digital display, nothing's really changed for the e-tron. It just has an electric powertrain, which I really enjoy because if you're used to the Audi platform and the Audi kind of technology, there's nothing really changed and you know how to work everything, which is a really nice feature.
Yep, and one of the things also that you'll notice is that it has the Audi adaptive air suspension on board as well. And back when this launched, that was, somewhat unique because we were starting to see less expensive EVs coming out, again smaller though, everybody keep that in mind, that didn't have adaptive air suspensions, and the ride was really firm because in order to compensate for the weight of the battery pack, if you don't have an adaptive suspension system and you're trying to base it on, a common set of components, oftentimes the ride quality just really falls apart. And that's one of the things that we see, for instance, in the Tesla Model Y and in the Ford Mustang Mach-E and other vehicles like that. There's just not a lot of suspension travel and they're pretty heavy. So, it ends up just having that really firm ride. Also with the Model Y, even though it's actually lighter than an X3, they really wanted it to be sporty and they really wanted it to have that very aggressive small SUV driving dynamic or hatch driving dynamic, whatever you want to call it. With the Q8, they were going after more of a grown-up kind of mission, and I kind of like that because this is really comfortable.
Yeah, it's definitely more of the demographic I would see driving a Q8 is an older, maybe retiree crowd. Something that this is your golf course car. This is to go to the golf course, there are clubs in the back, or even go to the grocery store a weekend trip. This isn't necessarily catering to the sporty crowd. Now, you said that there is a SQ8.
That's true.
e-tron. So that is maybe more of that nature.
And that is definitely a better handling option. I would still say, though, it falls on the same side of things as the larger options that I was talking about before, like Model X, ZDX A-Spec, Polestar 3, etc. Polestar 3 is really fun to drive, but it still has that sort of grown-up suspension, grown-up drivetrain flair where things are smooth, you punch it. There's unquestionably a lot of power. We have over 400 horsepower here, but this is not going to snap your neck back in the seat like so many EVs out there. And if we just come to a complete stop here, for instance, we're not going to go over the speed limit, but just see what this is like from 0 to 10. You do get that instant snap there at the beginning, but to 40 miles an hour, it wasn't earth-shattering.
Yeah, that was interesting how that initiated.
Yeah, you get that initial kind of oomph.
And but it doesn't carry on from that initial punch. It kind of falls off and then it comes right back. It's kind of interesting. I've never been in an e-tron, so maybe that's normal, but
it's normal for this model. Let's put it that way.
Really?
The SQ8 is obviously more aggressive at the launch. We get a decent amount more power out of that model. The Q4 e-tron, it's actually really kind of slow on the acceleration, or sort of gentle, I guess would be the way to go. It ramps that power up to the electric motor a little bit more gradually than some. It's more of that, civilized grown-up kind of feel out on the road.
Yeah, maybe caters to a different crowd than wanting performance, but it rides very nice. That adaptive air suspension definitely is helping keep this very composed on this road. And these roads have a decent modulation left and right. Not a lot of imperfections in this current state, but it feels firm but soft at the same time.
Yeah, it has that classic Audi adaptive air suspension vibe. It feels very, very familiar if you've been in, an A8 or a Q7, etc., with the adaptive air suspension. They all have that very familiar feel. It's obvious that Audi really wanted to create an EV for the Audi crowd, for the Audi lover. They didn't want to create a Tesla impersonation. And I think that was exactly the right thing to do because, if you really wanted a Tesla, why not just go buy a real Tesla? Why not have something that's a little bit more unique in this vehicle? Now, of course, I should mention that the Tesla Model X actually has a pretty decent ride because it's relatively lightweight for its size, and it also has an adaptive air suspension system.
Okay.
Tesla really has, a lineup of vehicles that feel very different. So Model 3 and Model Y are much sportier, more aggressive with the regular steel spring suspension. You can now get adaptive dampers in the new Model 3 Performance, but still a steel spring-based suspension. And then you have the airbags in the S and the X, which deliver much more of a Germanic mainstream luxury SUV and luxury car vibe. So you do have those sort of polar opposites in the lineup. And again, the Tesla competitor here really would be the X. But the X2 row versus this is not going to feel quite as normal German car luxury. Although, again, it's actually a little bit closer than the others because it still has an LCD instrument cluster. The seats are a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more adjustable. But it's going to have that egg-shaped profile with a moonroof that doesn't have a shade.
Yeah, I would much prefer this body style over the, like you said, egg shape or doorstop body style. I think this is a lot more attractive on the road and doesn't draw attention like the Tesla does. I don't know if it's the attention that I'd really want. And I'm not talking bad on the design. It's definitely not my cup of tea, but it's just different from everything else on the road. This kind of blends in, but if you know what it is, it's a nice vehicle. It's very luxurious inside, nice wood grain up top. You have the 3 screens, one for climate control, one for the navigation. And it's just a nice experience in here. It's not anything that's too outstanding, like it's not outlandish. It's pretty understated in the grand scheme of things.
If you want to spend a little bit less on long-term maintenance, if you're planning on buying an EV, you might want to check out something like the Cadillac Lyriq, because that does not have an air suspension. I do find it weird that Acura gets an air suspension in the General Motors manufactured ZDX. It's the only one in that little mini platform of Ultium EVs that gets an air suspension. But the Cadillac gets a steel spring. Of course, the Polestar 3 has an air suspension as well. The Tesla has an air suspension. So air suspensions in this segment are pretty normal. The Mercedes, of course, does as well in the EQE SUV. But I have to admit, I think if I were shopping in this segment and I could find a deal on it that's good enough, I think I might choose the BMW because the BMW iX looks really cool. I like the more upright SUV design that we have in that model. But I also have to admit, the iX is pretty expensive, whether we're talking about leases or purchases, probably because of all the carbon fiber and the advanced materials that BMW is tossing in that model. I do have to say I like that look of that sort of more X5 shaped SUV than something that's, let's be honest, it's a little bit more station wagony in a way here.
Yeah, for sure. Now, in your opinion, what do you like better in terms of user interface? Do you like Audi or do you like BMW?
I think that in this generation, we haven't experienced the newest generation of Audi's infotainment, which is coming out soon. I think that in this generation and the current generation of iDrive, I do prefer iDrive's single screen and I think a little bit more cohesive interface to the 2-screen setup that we find here. But I have to admit that as far as the instrument cluster goes, I would prefer the Audi instrument cluster, especially if you're willing to keep paying for that subscription so you get the Google mapping there. That is a really cool design. There's nothing wrong with the BMW interface, and it does give us 2-screen Apple CarPlay mapping, which I really love. But I think that just the general text font here and the general design is a little bit more my preference.
Less busy and a little less overwhelming. Sometimes the BMW can get pretty cluttered on the gauge.
Yeah, it's really colorful, which is can be kind of nice, but it can be busy. This is a bit more simple.
That is nice having the maps up there.
The map
that is pretty cool.
The map is really cool. And on the BMW, you'd get the map, and the map could be driven by your phone, but it's not going to have the Google satellite imagery that we find over here. The reason that I think people get confused when we start talking about some of these differently sized EVs is because a lot of people, again, want to compare them directly against the Tesla product lineup. And there people get confused. Is this a Model X competitor? Is it a Model Y competitor? This is more Model X than Model Y because of the size, especially the size of that back seat. And then, yeah, some of the exterior dimension sizes, and of course, the infotainment and navigation functionality that we find inside, the quality of the interior components, etc., the wood trim, the bigger LCD, all that jazz going on inside. Remember that the Tesla Model X starts as a 2-row SUV, and that's the only model that will get the federal tax credit. The moment you add 3 rows, it actually loses the tax credit because it gets too expensive. And pricing of that model is going to be right in line with this Q8 e-tron. Also right in line with the approximately $76,000 starting price of this model is going to be the top-end version of the Acura ZDX, certain versions of the Cadillac Lyriq, certainly the Polestar 3 as well. For me, I think the Polestar 3 is the most direct competitor to this model. I think I prefer the Polestar 3's style, both inside and outside. I like the lighter interior and the gold shoulder belts, of course, that you can get in that model, but I think the exterior design of this is more attractive to my eye. And there are certain dimensions that I think are better thought out in the Q8 e-tron than the Polestar. I think the cargo area is about as big as I would expect it to be, whereas I find that the Polestar 3's cargo area is a little bit smaller than I had expected it to be. I find the seats in the Polestar 3 to be a bit more comfortable than this, but these seats are significantly more comfortable than the ones in the Cadillac Lyriq. The Lyriq has relatively short thigh cushions, which is something that I've never quite understood about that model, and I find those seats actually a little bit less comfortable than the related Chevy Blazer. This is certainly more comfortable. Audi also gives us a bigger battery pack than we find on average, and that helps compensate for the bigger, bulkier dimensions that we find in this vehicle and the lower efficiency. You can get about 300 miles of range as long as you don't get the SQ8 or you don't get carried away with options like the wheels and tires that are available differently than the base Q8. Also important to keep in mind, most of the EVs in this segment are probably going to be leased. And at that point in time, which lease deal is actually more important than the MSRP? Generally speaking, this leases for less than a 2-row Tesla Model X. And it's right in line with something like the Cadillac Lyriq and the Acura ZDX, interestingly. So the Polestar 3, generally speaking, seems to be a little bit more expensive to lease. You will get more power out of the Polestar 3, and I really love its torque vectoring axle in the back. I think that mechanical torque vectoring axle is just a stroke of genius. We also have the promise of more advanced ADAS systems in the future with the available onboard LiDAR module. That's something that unfortunately doesn't do anything yet. So we have it on board of the new Volvo EX90, the 3-row version basically of that Polestar 3, but it's just data collecting. It's not actually doing anything for you yet. So lots of promise in some of those additional tech features, the bigger screens that we find in there, the newer software, but it's not quite a fully baked potato, oddly enough. The Q8 e-tron, however, is at the end of its life, it seems, so we don't know exactly what its future holds, but we do know that we're probably going to be seeing either a replacement or Audi moving in a slightly different direction with some of their newer EVs. This model's probably going to still be on sale for at least another calendar year, but its future after 2025 is a little bit uncertain at this time. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what would you choose if you were shopping in this segment? Are you interested in the Q8 e-tron, or are you maybe leaning towards something a little bit less expensive like the Cadillac Lyriq and the ZDX? Those are certainly less expensive than this, especially the base Lyriq. And the base Lyriq does get the $7,500 tax credit. Actually, the entire Lyriq lineup does, and the entire Acura lineup gets that tax credit as well. Of course, the Acura, it's really just a Cadillac in Acura clothes, and it's really obvious inside and outside, so really putting those two together, it's just a matter of personal preference which style you prefer. Both of them, I think, are definitely solid competitors to this, but I think when it comes to refinement and the overall package, I think Acura does have a slight win over that pair. Let me know what you think about that, and I'll see all of you next week.